Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I am your host, Brad Swail. Today, I welcome to the show Mark P. Jones, PhD. He is the fellow in political science at the Baker Institute, the Joseph D. Jamail Chair in Latin American Studies, and a professor in the Department of Political Science at Rice University. Dr. Jones, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing quite well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to get to speak to people like you on this podcast. I wouldn't have an opportunity to speak to you probably in any other setting, so it's truly a pleasure. I really love doing this and speaking to all sorts of people, including you. So let's get started. I gave a very brief background there. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Well, I've been here at Rice since 1994, where I've been working in the Baker Institute, both on issues of Texas politics, U.S. politics, and Latin American politics, particularly Argentina and Central America. So covering the gamut, although in recent years focusing much more on Texas politics, sort of a portfolio balance.
Yeah. So I did read that about you. I found it interesting that you're writing about Texas politics, but doing some background, Latin American studies is one of your focuses, if not your main focus. Especially Argentina and other countries. And I'm just kind of wondering sort of where that came from. What inspired you about politics? What about politics intrigues you, especially Latin American politics?
Well, I've always been interested in politics. I worked in congressional campaigns growing up in St. Louis. When I grew up in St. Louis, and from a very early age, I was working with people like Dick Gephardt, both when he was running for president in 1988, when he was minority leader, and then when he ran through 2004, although since about 2004, I have pretty much avoided active participation either on the Democratic side or the Republican side. But overall, I've always been interested in politics. I've always had a strong interest in American politics and U.S. politics, but the way that the discipline of political science is set up, you can't do both Latin American politics and American politics when you're starting out. The discipline wants you to choose one and get narrowly focused within it. And so I've always had a strong interest in Argentina and Latin America. And so I started off in that route. Although once I arrived at Rice with tenure, I'm a chaired professor, and you have a little more freedom to do what you're more interested in. I was able to shift back to my focus on American politics, and in this case, especially Texas politics. Because the tools that we have in terms of, and that we developed to study Argentina or the U.S. Congress, or say Honduras, El Salvador, are very easily transferable to the study of Texas. And so that's where I really started to devote quite a bit of time in studying Texas politics in the way that others study national politics, either in the US or elsewhere.
Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, you're talking about tools that you use to study sort of Latin American politics and how they are easily, applied to Texas politics. And I'm thinking, like, what kind of tools could that be? What's a tool that you use to study politics that would transfer from Latin America to Texas?
Oh, so one would be public opinion data and public opinion analysis. And so doing surveys in Latin America, you always have, everything has to be modified a little bit for the specific context. But that's one of the things. I worked in an area called comparative politics. And so if I'm studying Argentina, you study it a little differently than, say, you would study Honduras or El Salvador. But the tools are essentially similar. They're just slightly modified. And it's just bringing those tools to bear to study Texas. And that's whether we're using public opinion data to study voter behavior and public opinion, or we're using roll call vote analysis to study legislator behavior. So much of the work that I've done on the Texas Legislature in terms of studying liberal conservative patterns there, I've also done for the Argentine Congress, as well as many other legislatures from the U.S. Congress, U.S. House and Senate, down to the Salvadoran National Assembly.
So I guess you say that the tools that you developed for Latin American politics transfer easily to Texas politics. I'm curious why that is. My mind immediately goes to, Texas having a large Hispanic population, but I don't know if that's why.
No,
why is it?
No, it's just really the tools that we use to study other countries as well as to study the United States are pretty easily transferable. They're designed to be used in multiple settings, and so I just use them. Tools that I've used in Latin America, I use here. You have to modify them somewhat, but you have to do that whenever you're going into a different context. So even the way I study Texas politics today, when I'm doing some analysis, say, of roll call votes, is different when I'm doing studies of, say, Texas politics in the 1870s. Some of the sources, I've done both, but the sources, some of the methods are the same, but you have to modify them to make them appropriate for the context in which you're working.
Yeah, I guess it's almost like a totally different state between 1870 and 2025. It's almost totally different. The name is the same.
Name is the same and some factors, but yeah, but but actually, if you go back to the early 1870s, if you were looking at liberal conservative, it would be flipped. The Republicans were the more liberal or progressive on the scene, and the Democrats were the more conservative.
Interesting. So
until the Democrats vanquished all Republicans by the end of the 1800s, and then we had a period of pure Democratic rule for all more than 60 years.
When you say they vanquished the Republicans, that means there was no statewide elected Republicans?
There were no Republicans even in the Texas House or the Texas Senate. The last ones vanished right before 1900. And I think it was the 1899 session was the final Republican. It was an African-American legislator from Colorado County, if I remember correctly.
Dang, I didn't know. I knew that there was a long stretch where Democrats had a stranglehold on Texas politics. I didn't realize that it was that complete. I didn't know that it was 100%. So that's super interesting. I appreciate the history lesson. So, shifting gears to today, your name sort of popped up. I was reading through the news as I'm wont to do. A Texas Tribune article popped up about Elon Musk and his outsized power over Texas politics in the 89th Texas Legislature. And your name came up. You had a quote in there, but I wanted to talk to you more about that. Not only Elon Musk and individuals with power in Texas, but sort of what kind of power are they wielding? Is it personal? Is it actually good policy? That sort of stuff. So I guess I'll just kind of start with the basic question of: does Elon Musk? Do you think he has too much power?
Well, Elon Musk is the richest person in the world, so he has a lot of power. He actually, though, has less power today than he had, say, a month or two ago, where his power was at its apex. Whereas when he combined his status as being the wealthiest person in the world with a considerable amount of investments here in Texas, combined with his strong alliance with President Donald Trump, the most powerful and influential Republican, if you come down to Texas primary politics and overall within the state. Although at the state level, Abbott and Trump are pretty similar, I think, in terms of their overall approval ratings. But by and large, Donald Trump, when Musk was working hand in hand with Donald Trump, he effectively had all of his wealth, his investments here in Texas, plus an alliance with the most influential Republican in the country. That's pretty powerful. Now, and that was during the session. And so he was able, I think, to get quite a bit done in the session, in part because of that sort of balance where on one hand, he had a tremendous amount of investments already here in Texas. So just like anyone, he would be seen as important because he's doing a lot in Texas. He also, though, is the wealthiest person in the world and has shown a willingness to spend his money on political campaigns, making him more influential. And then to top that off, he had Donald Trump essentially supporting him and allied with him. Now, I would say some things have changed. Now, clearly, Musk is now at odds with Donald Trump. And so while he remains the wealthiest person in the world, as well as has the ability to spend money, he's not as consequential in the place where it really counts in Texas, and that's the Republican primary. If I had to choose between having the wealthiest man in the world endorse me and having Donald Trump endorse me, if I was a Republican primary candidate, I would prefer Donald Trump. Because at the end of the day, that endorsement is going to be worth more than Musk's money, in part because we've learned money in the Republican primary only helps you so much. These are not high turnout elections. And a large portion of the people who participate in them are pretty well informed and not all that easily swayed by commercials or ads or attacks. Now, clearly, having money always is a good thing, and you would prefer to have more of it than less of it. Yeah. But if I had to choose between the endorsement and support of Donald Trump or the endorsement of Elon Musk, and I could only have one of them, if I'm a Republican primary candidate, I go with President Trump.
So, there's sort of a few different moving parts there, right? There's the obviously a lot of money begets a lot of power. Obviously, you can buy and do a lot of things that I can't do personally as a podcaster. But there's, that was that a lot of that influence is certainly on the federal level, and it came down to the Texas level, of course, as well. He supported some things in the Texas legislature that passed and opposed a couple that failed. So there's some successes there, right? But is that any different from any other well-connected person or entity in Texas politics? Was there something unique about Elon Musk that gave him an outsized influence in the Texas ledge?
Well, I think what's unique was the ties to Donald Trump. That
Yeah.
is, we've had where he was effectively working hand in hand with President Trump at the federal level, and had it been a key factor in Donald Trump's victory in November. Uh, Even in the heydays of George W. Bush, with a lot of very wealthy Texans supporting him, we never had a single individual, albeit very wealthy, who had that strong a tie to the president. Nor was George W. Bush ever that influential. Or better say, George W. Bush was never as influential within the Republican primary as Donald Trump is today, in part because it was a different primary back then. The way the Republican Party worked internally was different. The primary was less important than sort of broader elite support. But by and large, I think we are in a situation where this is a very unique. Musk is unique because of the level of his wealth is higher than any Texas billionaire. It's just more, and his ability to spend is essentially unfettered. Even the wealthiest Texas billionaires have some constraints on their expenditures, whereas Musk really doesn't. And has shown a willingness to pour immense amounts of money into campaigns.
So, as far as Elon Musk, some of the bills that he supported, like one of them was making the installation of Tesla backup power generators more, like making it easier to install, like less regulation on that.
Right.
Which, okay, that obviously benefits him and his companies
Yeah.
directly, but that could also be just could make sense policy wise.
Right.
So I'm wondering, is he, there's an idea of politics, especially, I guess at every level. I was going to say especially in Texas, but it's all over the place. That people with power use it to influence politics in this really negative, evil way. And I'm kind of looking at something like that, and I'm thinking, well, all right, yeah, it benefits them, but that also kind of makes sense that you'd want that to be a little bit easier. We just had the flooding in Central Texas over the weekend. We've had power outages. Generators, more easily to install generators sounds like a good policy.
Right. I mean, so a lot of the policies he is promoting this session, anything that related to battery power or to EVs, benefits Tesla, but it also benefits the entire energy as well as helps move policy in that direction. So those are types of policies that and there are many of them that he supported that indirectly will benefit Tesla and benefit him, but also benefit pretty much the entire industry or pretty much anybody in that area. Then he also, though, had the more targeted legislation, which was more based towards the star base down in the valley, down in the RGV, where that legislation, though, was more targeted to benefiting just him, say closing off beaches or the things that were focused in terms of his specific industry or
Yeah.
his specific business.
Yeah, I think one of them was also criminal offense of flying drones near the starbase.
Yeah. Wait, but in fairness, we also, the agriculture industry got something similar passed to be able to fly over feedlots a few sessions back. So that's not uncommon. Is effectively people not, and at least with Starbase, there's actually, I think there's probably from a security perspective as well as a technology perspective, there's probably a much better justification to not have drones be flying over than say over feedlots where it's pretty much obviously only being done so that people can't see the condition that the cattle are in.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. One could maybe argue about whether it should be a criminal offense or just like like whatever, maybe the level of offense may change, but it seems to make logical sense. So obviously, you mentioned earlier, alluded to the Elon Musk and his federal efforts with the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. There was a DOGE committee at the 89th Texas Legislature. I think it was a different acronym. I think it was delivering on government efficiency instead of Department of Government Efficiency or something like that. Um, but Governor Abbott signed into law the Texas Regulatory Efficiency Office, which slashes regulations, stricter standards on new regulations, and checks growth of the administrative state, is sort of the headline banner. The
Right.
details of it may be a little bit different, of course. Um, is there a moment of Doge? It seems like Doge sort of fizzled out at the federal level. It's not quite as popular anymore for one reason or another. Is that something that is here to stay here in Texas, do you think? Is that something that constituents want?
I think some constituents want, but I think as we found at the federal level, a lot of it is easier said than done. Actually, reducing the size of government is a difficult task, and well, I think there can be some really credible cases made that some parts of the federal government, though not all, are essentially bloated, and where this type of sort of efficiency evaluation and cutting was needed. Texas has always run a pretty lean state government. So it's not entirely clear that you're going to find all that much more fat or excess in Texas. But I think it never hurts to actually look and study these things from a policy standpoint to see, is there ways that you can make things more efficient, reduce burdensome regulations, cut things that seem to not be working. But I would not expect it to have as much of an effect in Texas, simply because the Texas state isn't as large, we've never had the critiques of it being bloated the same way you have of the federal bureaucracy. And even at the federal level, I think after they went after the lowest hanging fruit, they found that it was actually more difficult than they realized to bring about the cost savings without adversely affecting services. And that's always a balance. And we're hearing a lot about that right now after the tragedy in Kerrville related to the National Weather Service. And I think in this case, there probably isn't good evidence that there were anything related to the cuts caused, essentially the National Weather Service to be less effective in this case. But moving forward, there is that potential. That is, especially once some of these cuts come online in greater force.
Yeah. So I want to spend just a little bit of time here on why it's difficult to shrink government, as Elon Musk found out the hard way, it seems. Your focus is on Argentina and the president of Argentina elected in 2023, I think, Javier Milei. Am I pronouncing his name correctly?
Milei, yeah.
You say it much better, but it's okay. We're in Texas. So, he is famous for, I'm not an expert on Argentina like you are, but my understanding is that he cut a ton of government. And since then, maybe there were some hiccups along the way, but things are going really well in Argentina. The inflation is way down. There's more prosperity, things like that. What's different about that case as opposed to, say, in just general American politics, maybe even Texas politics?
So Milei has been successful in bringing Argentina's inflation down, as well as getting the economy more on track. But at the same time, he's done it by dramatically cutting pensions and healthcare and school spending in a way that it would probably be unacceptable in America. That is, President Trump has shown that he's not willing to cut Social Security and Medicare. Milei cut Social Security and Medicare, in addition to their version of Medicaid and a level of cuts for universities and public sector social welfare that I think would probably, as we saw with the big beautiful bill, would not be possible in the U.S. In part, he was able to do that through the executive there has a few more tools that they can use in the executive branch. But I think if in Milei's situation, the jury's still out over whether he'll actually be successful or whether there's been just a lot of pain and suffering and that at the event, eventually it'll crash, which has been what Argentina has traditionally done. It's a very pendular country that gets booms and busts. So there's a boom. The Menem era was a neoliberal era with strong economic growth. It busted around 2001. Then you had a sort of from the left side was in power until about under the Kirchners into 2015. It crashed. Mauricio Macri took over, had a few good years. It crashed. It's back and forth. So what's unclear is whether Milei will be successful, but certainly he's been able to engage in a set of deep cuts to a greater extent than even President Trump's been able to. And that's in part because the Argentine Congress is not as strong in terms of resisting the executive as, say, the U.S. Congress is in resisting the executive.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think he's a fascinating figure, but we'll have to save that conversation for another podcast. So the special session starts in 2 weeks from today, July 21st. I think the big legislation that's going to be on there is SB3, the total THC ban in Texas, pushed very hard by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. As people know, Governor Abbott vetoed that and put it on the special session for further consideration, maybe a pared back version, just more regulations, something, we'll see exactly how it plays out. In your studies of this, what do you think of that? Where do you see that going?
Well, I think the lieutenant governor wants to, I think we have to start going back to 2019 when the original legislation was passed, legalizing industrial hemp.
Yeah.
At that point, I don't think the lieutenant governor or Senator Charles Perry, the author of that bill, thought that it would effectively be the tool through which we would have backdoor marijuana legalization in Texas.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be the case. And so this whole unregulated industry developed, formed, and turned itself both into a very potent lobbying force, because we're talking billions of dollars, but also developed a set of essentially constituents, that is, people who frequent these establishments, including many veterans and others. That pressure that both the money of that lobby had, as well as the veterans and others actively arguing for the governor's veto, I think put the governor in a position where he wanted to give the Texas legislature another go around towards regulation. And I think now what's clear, even the most progressive activist in this area would agree that the current status quo is undesirable. That is, there is effectively no regulation on this industry, meaning that products are being sold at some stores that have much higher levels of THC than are allowed by law. And in fact, where the store owners themselves probably don't have a good idea of how much THC is in their product.
Yeah.
The balance will be, and this will be I think what they'll be working on heavily during the special session, is trying to find some common ground between an outright ban and allowing backdoor marijuana legalization. So for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, anything that allows this industry to operate beyond a very narrow corridor is going to be seen as unacceptable. And what's not clear to me is if you really do start putting very rigid rules in related to what products can be sold and the levels of THC being at the current legal minimums, or I think it's 0.3, can these stores still be profitable? And so that's sort of the balance. And so I think a lot of this legislative session will be, on one hand, the lieutenant governor pushing for something close to, if not an outright ban, which I think he realizes now is not an option, but something that effectively really does follow the spirit of the original legislation, which is not to legalize marijuana in Texas. Is that going to be compatible with what this industry feels that they can still be successful and profitable with? And it's not clear to me that those two sort of distributions overlap.
Yeah, and there are other things on the special session agenda as well. As of this conversation right now on July 7th, I don't know. I haven't seen anything else being added, but I know there's been calls to add things like the GOP priority of ending taxpayer-funded lobbying. I don't know if Governor Abbott, I think he's indicated that he's interested in it. I don't know that if it's on there yet or not. But is that something that, you studying Texas politics, there's a that's been on there. That's been talked about for several sessions now, and it just can't really seem to get past the goal line. Why do you think that is? And is this something, do you have any thoughts about that in the special session?
Well, so, I think it's a difficult bill in the sense that there are a lot of, school districts, cities, counties, and others who want to be able to lobby the state. And so you have a natural constituency that views this as a threat. You also have within the legislature many legislators who often earn some of their professional salary serving as de facto, if not lobbyists, or at least working with these institutions. And then you also, of course, have the Austin lobby, which doesn't want to see this source of revenue dry up. You put all that together, that's a pretty potent group of force that essentially is trying to keep this legislation from passing. And if I recall correctly, even during the regular session, the legislation that died in the House had been watered down by allowing these cities, counties, ISDs to use public money to hire in-house lobbyists, which in some ways would seem would effectively allow them to no longer hire out external lobbyists, but would still allow them to engage in lobbying.
Yeah, I wonder if the advantage there is that there's maybe some sort of transparency rules that they have to follow. I don't know.
Yeah, you would know you would know directly who the person was, but you know that, but you also know who that is now from the lobbying reports, as we know who they hire as their lobbyists.
Yeah. So just real briefly, I know you're short on time here. You also came out recently with a ranking of the Texas, the 89th Texas Legislature as far as liberal versus conservative. You ranked the members I think it was senators, most conservative to most liberal. I think Senator Michael Creighton was the most conservative and most liberal. I think it was Senator Molly Cook, or one other person. I can't remember.
Yeah, it would be Molly Cook was I ranked both the Senate and the House.
Okay.
So in the Senate, yeah, Molly Cook was was the most liberal, but very close was Sarah Eckhart, pretty much indistinguishable.
Okay. Yeah.
Brian Hughes from Mianola was the most conservative Republican, and then you had others like Brandon Creighton up there and Mays Middleton with him.
Yeah, I think did I say Michael Creighton or did I say Brandon? Michael Creighton's, I think, an author. My mistake. But I wanted to ask just real briefly, you're ranking this, and I think it's not the first time that you've ranked them. And just sort of based on your analysis, is the state of Texas, it being sort of it's seen as the sort of the bastion of conservatism, or at least one of them in the United States, is it becoming more or less conservative?
The Republican Party is certainly becoming more conservative. That is, if we look at the Texas Senate, it's a good way to look at it. If you look at the Texas Senate, say back in 2012, or let's say the 2013 session, the most conservative senator in the 2013 session was Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. That was his final year as a Texas state senator before he was elected lieutenant governor in 2014. Patrick, at that time, you had a host of Republican senators that were more towards the center. People like Robert Duncan, Bob Deuel, Tommy Williams, John Corona, Kevin Eltife, Kel Seliger. Over the course of the past decade, all of those individuals have been replaced, and they've been replaced generally by more conservative. They've always been replaced by more conservative senators, some substantially more conservative. So in the Texas Senate, we can definitely see a pattern where the Senate has moved to the right, where, and one way to think about it is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, when he was in the Senate, was the most conservative senator. Today, if Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was in the Senate, he would be pretty much right in the center of it. That is, he sort of rebuilt the center around him, in his own image, in the sense that the center is now very representative. So if you're thinking about the Republican caucus and a distribution, it's very much revolves around Dan Patrick in terms of where. So where Dan Patrick was back in 2013 was considered to be an outlier in the Texas Senate. Today, it's considered to be the norm, the median, the sort of general focus of the Senate body.
Okay. I'm going to have to sort of keep that in mind, keep that framing in mind as I read through the news and the analysis of Texas politics. That's very interesting. Well, Dr. Jones, I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there a website or social media that you wanted to plug?
If you want to see the rankings of both the Texas House and the Texas Senate, they're on the Texas Tribune website. And then within each of those articles, there are links to the past studies for 2023, 2021, 2019, 2017, 2015, 2013, and 2011.
Dang. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jones. I really appreciate taking the time.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.